Where do we start?
Why don't you tell us a bit about your writing journey and how you came to write the book that you are sharing with us today?
Okay, I'm George Sorensen. I live in Lake Oswego, Oregon, which is a suburb of Portland, Oregon. I've been writing professionally for about 40 years, mostly in the corporate market for companies like 3M, where I helped introduce Post-it notes.
George, could you speak up just a little bit? Some people are
Sure.
having trouble hearing you.
Can you hear me now? I don't know why it wouldn't be loud enough. Yes, I worked for 3M. I worked for NASA. I worked for Boeing, Nike, and a whole bunch of companies over the years as a writer. And this book, Hot Dish Confidential, is my fourth book that I've written. And this is the first one that's written for fun and to be interesting, and not that the others weren't interesting, but it's about my cooking journey. So years ago, I was at a friend's house and he said, you don't really know how to cook, do you? And I said, well, I thought I could do okay. And he was said, well, I'm cooking a pork roast with a wild boar recipe. And I said, well, how do you do that? I didn't understand the technique for doing it. Can you help me out and teach me? And he said, oh, I'm a gourmet cook. Oh, well, of course I can teach you. I know just what to do. And discovered that there were several other people that said they were gourmet cooks too. And so I put together themed dinners, and I had these once a month. So the first one was Northern Italian. The second was the south of France. The third one was, I think, New Orleans. For Christmas, we did a Charles Dickens Christmas dinner with pheasant pie. We dressed up like Dickens characters. In the summer, we did a clam bake in a trash can. And along the way, everybody fought and argued. Chaos erupted. You get a bunch of people in a kitchen and they can't agree on anything at all, it turns out. So I wrote this into the story and told all the sneaky details about what everybody did and what I learned about cooking and the equipment that you needed in some cases, or some techniques, and included, I don't think 10 or 12 recipes in doing it. And even stories, for example, about the trash can clam bake. I was afraid we were going to kill everybody because you take a brand new trash can and you layer it with seaweed and clams and lobsters and chickens and potatoes and all this. I thought that the metal in the can would like give off some toxic fumes or something like that. So I called it poison control, and I asked them, what was going to happen. And they said, oh, no, go ahead, cook it. And that worked out too. So at the end of the story, I meet the girl of my dreams, and we make apricot jam and win the blue ribbon at the state fair. Well, that's the story of Hot Dish Confidential. So does anybody know what a hot dish is except me? Oh, come on. Do any of you from the Midwest? A hot dish is like a casserole, right? So all those get-togethers, all those picnics in church basements that your grandmother had in the day, they always said, bring a hot dish. They didn't say bring a casserole. So you get things like, noodles and chicken and cheese and peas and a can of cream of mushroom soup. They bake that. I did a TV show here, a morning show on one of the stations on Thursday, and one of the hosts said that the hot dish she remembered from her childhood was called funeral potatoes. I had to look it up, but it was the potatoes they would bring to funerals to eat after the funeral. on it. So there's tradition for that. So that is the story of Hot Dish Confidential.
Is that recipe in the book for the funeral potatoes?
No, because I only heard about it Thursday. But you know what is in the book is we had a dinner that was Tex-Mex, and we had rattlesnake enchiladas. So there was a rattlesnake enchilada recipe. There's one for Ort Man chili. And if you want to know why it's called Ort Man chili, read the book because there's a whole story about it. Then there's recipes for fish, for easy to make souffle. Let me think, asparagus, quiche, and a number of other things too. But it's not so much a cookbook. It's a story about the individual stories that happened as we went along. And there was a lot of trial and conflict, which always makes a story more interesting.
Well, will you share one of those stories with us?
What, well, the clam bake story was certainly one of them.
I'm saying, would you read a little bit from your book?
Read? Oh, you want me to read one? Well, I could. Why don't I read from the beginning of the book
Sounds good.
to give you for a little bit of a feel for how it reads. The first chapter is called Dining with the Gastronomically Correct. Some friends invited me over for dinner. Never knowing quite what to expect, I strolled into their house to find Bjorn in the kitchen wearing a splattered apron and insulated gloves. The rich, pungent smell around him seemed discreetly engineered to please his sophisticated palate. On the counter, a substantial piece of meat turned on a small electric spit. Bjorn basted it with a paintbrush. The details of how he could prepare anything like this lay beyond my understanding. It's going to be a little while before we eat. Lucretia's upstairs changing, he said, and I'm roasting pork using a recipe for wild boar. I took a big whiff of the spicy aroma and studied the kitchen setup. Colors from the house's white stucco walls and terracotta roof were duplicated in the wallpaper and interior trim scheme. Very nice, but nothing about the stove or utilities suggested this to be the home of a couple of master chefs. How do you cook something like fake wild boar? I asked. Just toss it on the fire? No, I marinated it overnight. Bjorn exaggerated his words to let me know how stupid I must be to think such a thing. You've got to keep your eye on it all the way through the operation, basting all the time, and you've got to make the sauce to baste it in. So the names have been changed for the people here to avoid any pushback from them from years ago. But that is the beginning of the how the whole cooking scheme works. And the idea of putting together themed dinners seemed to work the best because then people had something to shoot for. So if you're doing Northern Italian, then you can see what is generally made in that type of recipe. And when we did New Orleans cooking, of course, there had to be a gumbo recipe in that, and that gumbo recipe is in the book. So that is how the narrative goes.
Well, we will go ahead and open up the floor for questions, and I will get us started. Anyone who has a question can use the raise hand function. You can type it in the chat and I will read it for you. Or if you want, you can just take yourself off mute and say it as long as you wait your turn. And so what I want to know is, you mentioned the south of France and the north and northern Italy. Is there any significance to just those regions versus, say, something to represent the entire country?
Sure. And this is talked about in the book during those chapters. In the case of Italy, in the north, they have more cows, more pastures to graze cows and goats and things. So there's more milk. So you have a fettuccine sauce, which is Parmesan cheese and cream. In the south, you have more tomatoes. It's hotter and drier. So those are the two basic distinctions between those two parts of the country. And that wasn't something I would have known had I not had these dinners. They talk about the south of France as being the best cooking in the world, and perhaps it is, depending on what kind of foods you like. So when we moved from Northern Italian to the south of France, I was curious because those two regions join each other. So what is the difference? Well, in the south of France, you would tend to have more seafood some of the time. I was recently in Spain and it was just seafood, seafood, seafood all the time down there. So what's interesting, I think, and we don't see it always so much in the US, is in Europe, those parts of the country, they tend to eat more of what's available seasonally. And I think as restaurants and cooking get more sophisticated here in the United States, that will be more the case.
We have 2 comments for you in the chat, other than Bill with his tater tots. So hot dishes and Jello concoctions in the Lutheran church basement. So someone did get your hot dish reference.
Right.
And then I love your idea of theme dinners, especially Dickens. The antics at one of your dinners sounds like a fun read.
Right, and I'll tell you about the Dickens dinner in particular. There was one couple who were very competitive. Now, I don't know if they were better cooks than anybody else, but on that dinner, they made pheasant pie. So they had to go out and find pheasant. And it's not usually something that's stocked in every grocery store. So they had to track down a farm that raised pheasants and then you get that. And when you bake a pheasant pie, you take the pastry dough and you put the letter P on the top of it. So you don't confuse it with the apple pie or the strawberry rhubarb or whatever else you're cooking. But they also dressed up. They went to a costume shop and rented clothes to, wear a top hat and a waistcoat, with the tails in the back and the vest, that, and the wife of the two wore a big skirt, that they wore back in that era. So when you
It's
do
like my kind of party.
well, I've got another one too, is we did a Greek dinner. And for that, I did some research and, Greek wear these white robes, you see that in historically correct paintings and in sculptures, but the Greeks wore tunics, whereas the Romans wore, big togas. So you hear about fraternity toga parties. Well, this wasn't like that. This had to be a tunic, so it's a simpler outfit. I built a big cardboard Parthenon in the backyard. It was about 10 feet tall. It had cardboard on the front and cardboard pillars. And I painted, Parthenon gourmet dinner on the top. And everybody showed up in these tunics that they made, from bed sheets and, whatever they could find. And then they got grapevines, and put them on their heads. So there was like little bundles of grapes over their foreheads and stuff like that. And we took pictures. We had, there's one of the items is you take grape leaves and you wrap them and cook them, sometimes with meat on the inside. And it was pretty interesting to do that and then try and match the wine with it.
Do you have any pictures of this event? Because this would make for great social media coverage to get eyes on your book. Here's from this section of the book, and here's where we did this.
I do have actually some photos from it. I kind of hesitate putting them out on the internet because I haven't seen these people in a while. A couple of them have sort of gotten into trouble over the years, and I don't want to have them, come back and object to this. You've got to be
maybe
careful.
Run it by your publisher first.
Maybe I'll show it to you, Tanya. I'll sneak you a peek.
I appreciate it.
Right. So every dinner had something interesting happen.
Rick said he's actually eaten pheasant. He had him in his backyard or in his backfield.
Yeah, you can get people raise them commercially too.
Did you like it, Rick? Did it taste good?
It didn't taste that different from other types of
Poultry.
Yeah, I don't want to compare it to chicken because everything gets compared to chicken all the time.
I was gonna say it tasted like gamey chicken.
Yeah, well, it's oh, when you get what are sort of considered wild birds that haven't gone through the domestication process that you know, cattle have, or even turkeys and things, and so they are a little I think you're right saying gamey is the right word to describe them.
But I liked it. I thought it was delicious. I mean, it
It
was
is,
a
it
long
is,
time ago.
it's like eating elk, you know, or bison, the American buffalo. You know, you know it's different, but if you weren't told what it was, you might not immediately be able to guess it. I visited some friends in Norway last June, and they cooked moose, and they did there's a way to cook a chicken by opening it up, flattening it out, which was interesting difference in preparation. But the other thing they served was reindeer, which is, as you know, is domesticated caribou. And we don't eat those things every day
No,
here,
we don't.
but you go into a Norwegian grocery and there they are on the shelf with everything else. But what I think I learned in here, and what people are telling me about the book, is it's opening up their thinking about the things they cook, how they cook, and especially how they invite friends over. Because these days, so often people will just go out to a restaurant. Oh, let's go to my favorite restaurant. Well, it's fine to go to your favorite restaurant, but you have people over and you share the cooking a little bit. You get to know them better, faster, and there's more of a camaraderie to it.
Why don't you tell us a bit about the process of you deciding to turn this into a book and how you went about finding your publisher?
Sure. There was a book out years ago by Peter Mayle called A Year in Provence. And it was a bestseller. And Peter Mayle, who'd worked in advertising like I had, went on to write several other books, including a couple of mysteries and books like that. And I liked A Year in Provence a lot. So I thought, well, geez, I'm in the middle of these themed cooking dinners. Couldn't I turn my book into something like A Year in Provence? And it would be the American version of A Year in Provence. That was the inspiration for it. So I gathered together the recipes that I had. I talked to some of the people that were involved just to check the details and remember what order I had the dinners in and all of that. And then at the end of the thing, I went on a blind date, was set up on a blind date, and 30 odd years and two kids later, we're still together, and that story ends up being tagged onto the end of the book because that's how it fell into place. So that's how writing the book came about. So finding a publisher, I was, it's always difficult to find exactly who to publish your book, but I was sort of, I don't call it tipped off, but reminded that the smaller independent presses have a lot more flexibility about what they get. And they're a lot easier to get to. You can often directly email the person in charge of the press, or send them an email and get a response back. Say, I have a book about such and such a thing. Is this something you would like to take a look at? And the response time is much faster than it is trying to get into one of the big publishing companies. So I was looking through Facebook and had seen a writer who I knew who had a book published by this small press in Minnesota, Flexible Press. And I had not heard of them. In fact, they were a new press. They'd only been in business maybe a year. And since the book is set in Minnesota, I thought that was not a bad thing. So I was able to get in touch with the editor, publisher, Bill, and I said something like, I have an offbeat book here. I don't know if it'll fit in, but maybe you like stuff that isn't exactly what you're looking for. And he was cooperative, and I got to know him very, very rapidly, and he made the very wise decision to pick this to publish. And there was a story that goes along with this. Years ago, I was working for a presidential campaign. This is back in the 1979 election. And it was the independent candidate was John Anderson. He was running against Reagan and Jimmy Carter, who was looking for a second term. And John Anderson was considered the moderate senator candidate, but he was an independent, so he didn't have as good a chance. I was his campaign manager in Minnesota. So I mentioned this to Bill when we were sitting up at a conference that we were both attending in Seattle. And he said, "Oh yeah, John Anderson. I voted for him back then. In fact," he said, "I went to the last rally John Anderson had." And I said, "You did?" "Well, I planned that rally and made it all work. In fact, I was sitting right by the candidate." He goes, "I was in the front row holding a sign." Well, I picked up my phone and I looked through the pictures and I found a picture of the two of us. It was a picture from the back looking at the audience.
Yeah, that's awesome though.
And he's holding a sign in the front row, and he's got this big long bunch of hair, going there. And I'm sitting with my back to the camera, and we're both in the same shot. And the shot was decades ago.
All right, this is another picture I need to see because I need to see this hair
I
on
want
Bill.
you to see all my pictures.
I'm looking.
So we've gotten to be good. We've gotten to be good friends, and hardly it seems like hardly a day goes by where we're not talking about how many copies of the book we're selling and what the strategy is for doing that. And so I would encourage you all to check the smaller presses, the independent presses, and see if you can't make a connection with.
Hey, look, Rick says I voted for John Anderson. We are making matches today.
You're my guy. I was an elector. Yeah, so that's where we are, and I think the book is selling pretty well considering it.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, it just came out a few months ago. I just did an event at a winery yesterday out here in wine
That's a
country.
great fit for something like this,
It is, and
especially
so,
because of the whole trying to find the right wine for the particular dish aspect of the book.
you're right. And some of these wineries, like the one I went to, makes olive oil, and they sell, things to eat and cooking utensils and all of this stuff.
Yeah, there's a
So
lot of
yeah,
potential there.
I had a very successful day, standing at the table. Come here, talk to me. I got a book,
What is the charity that's involved that's connected to your book?
Right. It is it's a big food bank in the Midwest. I'm going to get the name wrong unless I find it.
This is my favorite element of flexible press is that they
Right.
require you to attach a
I
charity
want to say it's
to the
called
book.
Great Harvest. Maybe Bill can remind me of the exact name. I think it's called Great Harvest. And they
Second Harvest Heartland.
There you go.
Will you type that in the chat, Bill?
Sure.
Do we
And,
have any final questions or comments for George? If not, I want to bring Wayne up because he gave us an interesting fact and I would really like him to share it if he's still there.
I'm here.
Tell us about preparing chicken.
Well, I watch a lot of cooking shows, and the method you described of cutting it down the middle and flattening it out, it's called spatchcocking.
That's right.
So if you watch enough Food Network, you'll learn these things.
Yeah, you were quick with that. I was like, you know what? I think he deserves to be the one to share that.
Oh,
There
thank
you
you, Tanya.
go.
It's so good
You
to see you.
basically
Good
cut
to see you
the,
too.
you cut the backbone out of the chicken and then you fold it open.
I wonder how it got that name though.
Oh, it's probably some old English name, you know, it's one of those old things.
Old and archaic, but still in good use.
Still in around, still talking about it.
Well, thank you very much for sharing this. I have some ideas about some other ways you might be able to share this. So definitely email me and remind me to tell you those.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Oh, nice.
You could see Bill with his long, he had a perm there,
Ah,
Bill. And then I'm over on the right. And I'm in the tan coat on the right, and those are Secret Service agents. And that's back when I was a blonde. That's me. I was 27, I think. Some 28 maybe at the time.
what are the chances that you're both right there?
Well, you know, I think that there is the karma and fate, don't you think?
Yes. The universe brought you together.
And just for the record, they gave me the sign.
Oh, okay.
George probably wrote them all up in his apartment or something with magic markers, and he handed them out, so I had to hold the sign.
Hey, but you have front row, right?
It was great.
Very cool. Well, thank you very much. This has been very interesting. We haven't had this type of book, and I look forward to seeing more of it.
Thank you. Everybody buy copies and tell your friends.
Yes. Great gift for the holiday season, too.
The first chapter is called Dining with the Gastronomically Correct. Some friends invited me over for dinner. Never knowing quite what to expect, I strolled into their house to find Bjorn in the kitchen wearing a splattered apron and insulated gloves. The rich, pungent smell around him seemed discreetly engineered to please his sophisticated palate. On the counter, a substantial piece of meat turned on a small electric spit. Bjorn basted it with a paintbrush. The details of how he could prepare anything like this lay beyond my understanding. It's going to be a little while before we eat. Lucretia's upstairs changing, he said, and I'm roasting pork using a recipe for wild boar. I took a big whiff of the spicy aroma and studied the kitchen setup. Colors from the house's white stucco walls and terracotta roof were duplicated in the wallpaper and interior trim scheme. Very nice, but nothing about the stove or utilities suggested this to be the home of a couple of master chefs. How do you cook something like fake wild boar? I asked. Just toss it on the fire? No, I marinated it overnight. Bjorn exaggerated his words to let me know how stupid I must be to think such a thing. You've got to keep your eye on it all the way through the operation, basting all the time, and you've got to make the sauce to baste it in.